peaceful protests on behalf of Energodar. This is a town in the vicinity. So what they did is they took to the streets facing enemy tanks, and there were lines up to 100 heavy units, and within 2 to 3 days they held them back, making it impossible for them to seize Enerhodar, to seize the city. But then in the evening, they started shelling the protesters. Russia started shelling the protesters. They destroyed the barricades. They managed to enter the city and to begin seizing the energy station. In a week after it happened, they started torturing the staff. The people would disappear from their workplace. They would disappear from the streets. Our enemy seized everybody who participated in the protests and other protest events that were still happening in Enerhodar. On March 9th, we were still in the streets with Ukrainian flags near the monument of Taras Shevchenko, and we showed to the enemy that we have the unbreakable spirits, that we are Ukrainians. But of course, all of this was shot on video, and later it was used as evidence of people participating, and they would look for these people, identify them, capture them, incarcerate them in basements, held there for weeks or for months, and nobody knew what happened to these people, what is their health condition. Almost all made it back, but they were in terrible condition. I personally am familiar with a couple of people that shared their stories about the torture. Some people had their ribs broken, tendons torn apart. Some people were tortured by electric current. Everything was made so that people would change their views, their stance, because a different country and state arrived with their culture, language, and whatsoever. Everything that was Ukrainian was forbidden. We were not allowed to speak in Ukrainian. We were not allowed to celebrate any Ukrainian holidays, and it was just horrible. What concerns what was happening in the station, I was an eyewitness to these events. As I said, I managed my unit, and somebody came to me and informed that one of the colleagues was apprehended and heavily beaten. He got into the station through the turnstile, and he was waiting for his friend to arrive, and a military man said, well, you're counting us, you're trying to remember our faces, and he took him to the area of the staircase, and he got beaten up very severely, and it's impossible to describe it with words. This environment that has been imposed in Enerhodar, it was a prosperous, blooming city, and now it's only 10,000 residents of the people that cannot leave because it's prohibited to leave. And also there are the staff of the station that are still there. What is most scary about this is that these actions were performed by the country, the state. I'm talking about Russia, that is a member state of IAEA, and it's one of the founding members of this important organization. And this country has a lot of influence over IAEA, and there are representatives of Russia in the governing bodies, and there's the deputy director who's Russian. That's why they are trying to preserve their membership in the organization. Why they need it? I am a bit familiar with what was happening in the South Africa some while ago, that Russia suggested to the government and to the president that they build a large energy station, a nuclear energy station in South Africa. And I also know, I'm aware that these negotiations were taking place behind the closed doors, and that people were not familiar and didn't have any opportunity to find out about the real terms and conditions of these agreements. Why does Russia need this? Russia is trying to extend its political influence over the countries all around the world. Russia has decided that it's a country that can influence the world order, and that it could also be done at the expense of such detrimental agreements like the one that was suggested to the South Africa. Ukraine has a negative experience of this. All the 15 energy blocks, we have 15 that are active on the territory of Ukraine, they were constructed using Russian or Soviet technology standards. And we had an experience back in the early 2000s, at the end of 90s, early 2000s. Russia refused to provide us with fuel for our stations. Basically, it was blackmailing us under the pretense of some terms and conditions about the procurements, so that Ukraine would say yes to some political negotiations. So what I'm trying to say is that Russia uses nuclear energy, the development of nuclear energy in the countries, as the lever for influence, leverage for blackmailing such countries, so that they would be allies of Russia. That's why it's of utmost importance that the community in South Africa is very cautious about such attempts on the part of Russia. I also want to say, I would like to add to what Artem has shared about environmental risks, environmental effects, and also risks that are present at the station. You might be aware of the fact that the nuclear power station is not a production that could be, locked up, switch off the energy, leave it alone, and nothing would happen. It requires that every day, every second, there's work that is being done. There's provision of nuclear and radiation security in place. The staff has to be present 24/7, and there should be energy supply to all the mechanisms that discharge the heat from the nuclear reactor. I also want to say, I should say, that right now the station is in a terrible condition. The supply right now only boils down to one line, the one that passes through Dnipro, through Kakhovka water reservoir, and since beginning of September, when the station quit sending energy in the system of into the system of Ukraine, it has been supplying the station. It is 100 megawatts. It's a very large figure. What happens if this supply ceases? It means that the mechanisms that do the cooling in the reactors will come to a halt. There are emergency diesel generators that kick in automatically, but their fuel stock up only amounts to 10 days or so. And if this fuel stock up is used up and Ukraine has no opportunity to resupply this stock, then these mechanisms would quit operating. This would lead to temperatures going up, water evaporating, fuel melting, and then the core frame of the reactor would burn, the fuel would come outside, fire through the concrete, and this is the global nuclear disaster. And Artem was right saying that in the vicinity, the waters of Dnipro would take and carry this on, not just to the Black Sea, but also to the Mediterranean Sea, because this is the Mediterranean Sea basin. And this would lead to a disaster that is a disaster of a European scale. What is also disregarded by the environmentalists is the environmental pollution of the territories of South Ukraine, which is a breadbasket of Ukraine, and also the breadbasket of Africa, as we can see now. This grain agreement that Ukraine uses to transport the grain to Africa, and Ukraine won't be able to produce the grain. And this would mean famine for the regions in Africa, where South Africa is located as well. So this would be a hit as well. So the risks are extremely high. There's another risk that consists in the fact that the staff is compelled to sign agreements, to sign contracts with Russia, cooperation agreements in terms of being employed in a Russian company. And you know, we were hired by Ukrainians. Why weren't we fired by the Ukrainian company? Why would our staff work for Russia? But together, basically with the staff, they block their entrance to the station. Basically, the staff cannot enter the station and perform their duties. What does it lead to? This leads to this shortage of people, shortage of experts that are supposed to be there and to exercise control over nuclear and radioactive safety. They just, you know, headhunt people from the streets that know nothing of this, that know nothing of nuclear energy and radioactive and nuclear safety. There's another risk that basically sorry, Oleg, I need to interrupt you, but we are already we are already behind in terms of timing. Okay, there's so many things that I could still share, and I realize that we're pressed for time. I would be happy to take your questions. The last thing that I wanted to say is that, you know, we are now eyewitness to what is happening in Ukraine. This war is the war against Ukrainian nation, but also against humanity, because all the laws of humanity are violated. Global nuclear legislation is violated. So I call upon you to be very cautious about any context with Russia. This is to you, my honorable friends and colleagues from South Africa. And I wanted to say that Russia is an embodiment of global evil, and I think that evil should be punished. And this is also what my mission is today, to bring this to justice. Thank you for your attention.
Oleg, thank you very much for sharing your expertise, but also sharing your trauma about what you witnessed and what you personally had to go through. I think we have a few questions here that people are asking about commenting that there was a Russian organization, Eco-Defense, that has exposed the nuclear deal in South Africa, and they had to flee Russia simply because they were listed as a foreign agent, and it was not safe for them to stay any longer in Russia. And there was also a question about what you think are the risks for South Africa, because currently South Africa is closely aiming to close ties with Russia. Do you think there is a risk for weapons to be here, or further militarization, or what do you think are the risks linked to South Africa collaborating with Russia?
Можна відповідати? Я маю, звісно, власну думку на це питання. Ну, це справа лише уряду та народу Південної Африки.
Of course, is the business of the government and the people of South Africa in terms of who they cooperate with. But I want to say that Mr. Putin has been declared a war criminal, and over 120 countries worldwide has supported this and are entitled to arrest him and bring him to The Hague. And I think this speaks volumes. What concerns the construction of the station, I am convinced that behind the construction of the station and within the terms that were put forward for South Africa, there is a corrupt component behind it. There's also an issue about deployment of military base there, because South Africa has a very lucrative geopolitical location, and it has lots of lucrative fossil fuels. So it's a wonderful spot where they are situated. So I think this explains this interest that we see on behalf of Russia to the South African Republic.
Oleg, thanks a lot. Also, thank you very much to Oksana for the translation. Unfortunately, our time is pressing, but I hope we can organize another event with Oleg separately, because just the wealth of knowledge that Oleg can share with us.